Hey everyone. All right, share my screen here. Cool. So today I wanted to talk about Tailwind CSS. And is it bad? That's the title of this video. And right off the bat, let's say, no, it's not bad. Let's learn a little bit about it. And it really kind of just depends on your project and what you're using it for. So specifically, let's talk about a couple of these blog posts that I came across. And my history really relates to what all these people are saying, which is, I've written CSS for 15 plus years. And why would I need Tailwind CSS? Why wouldn't we just write regular CSS or SAS or something else and get rid of all this overhead and trying to look up things? So let's dive into all that. Let's figure out why. Well, what problem is Tailwind CSS trying to solve here? And I see a lot of this throughout the internet, throughout videos, and I want to just give my take on it because I think that I bring a couple different perspectives to it. And yeah, I kind of think I'm learning more, obviously, but leaning more towards Tailwind to solve specific problems. And the main problem that Tailwind solves is performance. You have one set of styles completely, you write it once and you'll never have a duplicate of, display block or position relative or whatever class. And then that CSS property and selector is, trying to do. So, this, I don't know any of these people. I just found these blogs and I thought they were really good, and kind of just reading through all the things, it really resonated with me. I think they make great points. And so one of the problems they're trying to point out here is, well, look at all this, overhead of all these class names inside of HTML. How are you ever supposed to maintain that? And I think the case that they're giving here, while yes, this looks terrible, we don't really know what the back end is that they made this do. Maybe they have a couple of things to apply all the different themes or dark or light themes of CSS, and then that adds all those classes there. So from a maintainability, maybe it's structured in a different way. This seems very one-off, right? Like, how do we know that we'll ever be writing CSS like this in Tailwind? We might not, right? And so, yeah, this might not be the best example. I mean, you probably had to go and really look and dig to find this. This looks pretty rough, but I don't think that there might be other things to look at to go, hey, maybe there's a better way to actually structure this and not do what's happening here. And again, we're only seeing what's in the DOM, so we don't know how this code base is structured to make this happen. So that's one example. But yeah, I'm going to try to break some of these things down. Like, yes, you have to do this in Tailwind, sure. Is that bad? It depends. Is that a little harder to read? Yes. This is definitely more simpler. So, there's trade-offs. How would you structure this? And we'll kind of dig into maybe some ways to do this. But yeah, this would probably be the proper way, and this does suck. And this is one reason why I've hated Tailwind to begin with, is all the verboseness of it. But then seeing kind of what some of these pros and cons are, why this could be a better approach. You could just write one class and then make it just do this, and then don't have to worry about, adding all these. That's an option too. So you don't have to do this. No one's forcing you if you want to stick to using Tailwind stuff. It's all meaningless. This is a great point. I agree with this. What does M3 even mean? Okay, we know Tailwind, we know that's margin, but what does 3 mean? What if someone has a custom config and has modified 3 to be 8 pixels instead of 3 pixels, like the obvious number would be? Or what if that means it's 12 pixels because it's in increments of 4? Like, we have no idea. So yes, all that gets blown away. However, okay, that's what our editor's for. So what's gap 20? Well, I should be able to hover over that and see it's 5 rem, and then let my editor do the logic for us to tell us that it's in 80 pixels, and whatever scaling that is, it figures that out, right? So I don't think that this is a very good argument of saying it's all meaningless. Maybe on the surface, at a quick glance, yes, it's meaningless. But if everyone's setting up their Tailwind config all the same, and you're bouncing between several projects, it would become less meaningless. It would become easier to understand when you're applying all these classes, right? So yeah, I do agree with all this. I know where they're coming from, but I don't think it's totally a valid point. They're talking about here, breaking this off and writing like one-offs. Yeah, we'll get to that. There's some other things in here that we'll talk about that, breaking out of the norm. An abstraction, right? Like, oh, okay, let's say they're using applies here. I'm briefly kind of just cruising over this article. It's probably better to like read it and really dive into it, but I want to cover a few points and several of these. So maybe I could do a little bit better at not just skimming this. But as far as like the apply goes, like Tailwind mentions, like you shouldn't use this, right? This is probably something you shouldn't do. But in this case, like it could be good, right? To have your button class, and that's exactly what I've done. I can show you on my project too. For small things that make sense, for small reusable components, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But you wouldn't want to just start right off the bat doing that unless you know that you're always going to be using these types of styles. Most of the time when we're using Tailwind, we're in a component-based library anyways. I can't say that I've seen a Tailwind project and some of these older or using Tailwind in like older projects, like PHP and stuff like that, such as like a WordPress site. Mostly I've been working in React lately, and so I don't know, some of this may or may not apply depending on your type of project that you're working on. I agree, maintenance could be an absolute nightmare, but think about all the CSS that you have to maintain too in various projects. Again, I'm coming from the experience of, I get it. I've written CSS pretty much my whole career, so I understand the different trade-offs of maintaining CSS in several files when you have tons of teammates, right? Versus, okay, well, everything's now in one file, one component, and if changes need to happen, then it happens there. So yeah, it could be a maintenance nightmare, or it could also be much easier to maintain. Which is a greater maintenance nightmare? Removing a class in some block of HTML and then forgetting to remove that CSS related to it in some CSS file. You know how many times I've come across dead CSS that is no longer existent because we've done work in some other, file and the CSS wasn't removed along with it. When you remove a class in Tailwind, that class is gone, and then that CSS would no longer be applied. So I don't know on this one. I don't think it just depends on the project, but in general, from what I'm seeing, I don't think it's as much of a nightmare as you'd think. Alternative, they're talking here. This kind of looks like Svelte or something like that. Sure, yeah, you could do it like this. That's fine, but the killer with all this stuff is the biggest thing that Tailwind solves is you don't have to come up with all these class names. So when I was working on my new website, do I want to name, what is the name of this title? Is it the hero title? Is it the large massive dash title underscore, blue or whatever the, block element modifier? Like, do you want to write all that out every single time? Or do you just want to say, text blue and whatever shade it is, and then, bump it up a few styles? You'll start to see the speed. I understand why people are talking about the speed and time it takes to develop. That's much more simpler. Again, I do see this point though. I've written CSS forever. I understand how easy this is to look, but you've got to manage this in two different places. Sure, you can scope things, that's great, but we can create one component and write that same thing. But again, it depends on your project. I'm still learning Tailwind, so I might not know all the things. Yeah, these are the main things I wanted to get into. Like, Tailwind's faster to write. Sure, yeah, it is. But I could write it just as fast, like he's saying with this. Yeah, absolutely. But where you get into writing it quicker, right on the element itself, and not having to worry about going into another file, typing out all the stuff, importing that file if it's brand new. Was it a styled component? Okay, now I got to write all that logic, and then that all adds to that overhead. So I don't know. Yes, it's faster of the overhead of creating new classes, getting them into that file, remembering the name of it, typing that all out, and then maintaining that between two different files, even with styled components too. There's a lot more overhead. So it is definitely faster to write. But I don't think that really matters. This isn't really an argument to be had. They're saying it isn't actually bloated. It compiles everything down for prod. This is one of the big things that led me to believe that, yes, this is why Tailwind is so nice. So let's see what they're saying. Tailwind generates might not be bloated, but repeating the gigantic strings of classes all over your code base adds to the size of the final HTML output. Okay, sure, yes, but that's just all text, right? We don't have to maintain massive CSS style sheets that all have to get downloaded and parsed as well. Things like gzip will reduce the network, sure, okay. Still takes time and CPU, sure, yeah, but like, are we really adding that much? Like, are we going to be doing this all over on every single element? I doubt it. And even still, it would be better to add more class names than manage more style sheets and have to download all those style sheets. So let's stop right here at this point, and I want to show you what does this final kind of bundle look? What is actually compiled down to? So on that I'm starting to work on and redo all this stuff for experimenting and learning, right? So we've got the font face, great. Now here's Tailwind. Okay, that's quite a bit of Tailwind. Why is it so much? Let's get into it. However, all the CSS on my entire website. Granted, there's not a lot right now, I get it. So probably not the best comparison. But there is one thing in here that's taking up quite a bit of the styles, and that is this thing called, get into that, and it's basically a typography class. You add just one class to add all the typography for like chunks of your site. So when we're going to talk about writing Tailwind for speed, there's another reason. And then we've got, my other stuff that I'm writing for the site. And then above it is kind of some other stuff for like the setup, right? That's it. That was all that after all this is bundled and you're going to compare two projects, one non-Tailwind and one with Tailwind that happens to have a lot more in here in my example that maybe I don't even need. Maybe I don't need this. That's all my CSS for my whole site. Yeah, right now my site's super small, but even larger websites, it's going to maybe grow a few more lines, another big block like that. You know how many websites I've seen where it's just bloated with all this unused, like even when I was building custom WordPress themes and I had the styles written out perfectly. I wasn't importing any type of reset. I had my own reset, all these different things. There were so many selectors and stuff that weren't even used for that particular project that could have just been removed. So we're talking about bloat, right? How much more are you really adding all your same styles over and over again? Every time you write display flex, how many times is that going to be in your output of CSS? So if we're trying to get the CSS file as small as absolutely possible, so that way it only has to download a very small CSS file when you go to your website, and then that's it. It's cached as long as you never add or change anything else with your styles. It's always going to be that fast. You're never going to have to download anything larger. I'd vote that's the whole point of Tailwind CSS. That's what's got me over to thinking like, well, what makes this so great? The performance is probably unbeatable. As your site grows more and more massive, you're writing less and less CSS. That to me is the biggest trade-off that I don't think a lot of people are talking about. Helps you stay consistent. I believe this. I believe it does help you stay consistent unless you use one-offs. One-offs is what they're talking about when I do something like this, right? A one-off is like if I add, instead of this thing, I do padding Y and I want to give it like a very specific 2 pixels, right? That's a one-off, right? It's breaking out of the norm of what the Tailwind classes are there. Yeah, sure. You might have one-offs. You're going to have one-offs. That's the reason why there's a way to get out of it. But the majority of the time when you're writing those classes, and I don't have to think about, is it going to look better to have 3 pixels? Is it going to have better to look 5 pixels, 6 pixels? I always like even numbers, and I see people write whatever. and then your whole website isn't consistent. So having a few one-offs, as they're saying here, that's not that bad compared to having one-offs all over the place where you're never consistent. You're having to use CSS variables or something else. The class name's already built in. The math and logic and spacing and that vertical rhythm, everything's all figured out for you. You could come up with your own if you wanted. I would vote that, yeah, it's much more consistent if you stick to it, right? When you use different numbers, well, yeah, how many times have we seen that writing your own CSS? So I don't think that that's a great argument here for his comeback. Tailwind's better than inline styles. I'm not sure about that. He's saying, yeah, it is barely, just like saying, okay, sure. You could say this is both rotten. Perhaps, yeah, but I don't know. I don't know what I'd say to that. I don't think we would be writing inline styles unless you're like trying to be super optimized and not have any style sheet be downloaded in the browser. That would be the only reason why you'd want to do inline styles, and that would be really hard to maintain. Maybe if you're a one-person team, sure. I know there's some guy on the internet, I think, that did that and posted his blog or something about it, but yeah, I don't think this is a great argument or comeback. The proper way to use Tailwind is make your own utility classes. No, it's not. I don't think so. I don't think that's true. When you're reaching for apply, I agree with him here. That's true. Just write regular CSS at that point. And that's also another point. Well, if something is so complicated, then just write the CSS in that and just include it, and then that's your class, right? If it's going to get that difficult, what's easier to maintain, you know? Tailwind's configuration defines values. Yeah, sure. And this is the part he's saying, it's going to go either way. Yeah, you're going to have people that do this. Yeah, my argument here would be you could write, why would we still write var in JavaScript? Should we be doing that? No. Could you? Sure. Same thing here. Should we be doing this? Well, yeah, probably not. You might have those one-offs, and it's okay to break that. You're going to break it here, and you're going to break it here. So which is easier, to catch this in a code review, or to have a whole bunch of styles that I usually see people, oh, there's the CSS, approve, no one looks it over, but this would be a little bit easier to catch. I'm not trying to defend Tailwind here, but it just feels like everyone's trying to say it's bad. I'm not really seeing that. Here's one thing that really resonates with me, the desk crashing shit. Like, of course, like we've written this CSS, maybe our whole lives. That's what we're used to. And then this thing comes along and you're just having to memorize all these stupid classes and add it all over the place, and it looks ugly and it's terrible and no one understands the CSS. Yeah, there's a lot of junior developers that don't understand the cascade and how that works. And so they get into Tailwind and it's just utter chaos. But if you understand it and you know how to use it, it's going to be a better tool. But I do agree here about, it just feels like everything that we've learned, built, worked on, it's all going away. And so, yeah, don't want to see that go away. So it is a little sad, but I think that there are things that make Tailwind really nice when it comes to getting the job done, getting it done quickly, and does it work, and does it have good performance? That's kind of the things that I'm gathering from why it is being adopted so quickly and how much there is of it. So, okay, that was one article. This guy, again, I don't know any of these people, but they all seem really cool and they have great points. His point here was like, hey, Tailwind doesn't have this. And these are all articles that I was like, yes, I agree. This is why I'm so against Tailwind too, and I'm never going to use it. And I'm like, well, that's a bad mentality. And I'm glad I switched kind of my mentality. Well, let's actually try it. Let's dig into it. Okay, it can't do this thing. Great. Well, what's the harm in just adding that to your regular, let me see if I can find the CSS file here, where that is. Don't know where I put it. What's the harm in just adding another little layer CSS selector here to do your one thing, and then just use that class, or add it inside the layer that it belongs? You don't have to. Maybe Tailwind doesn't support all things. This article is a little older. Maybe it supports it now, but sure, if you're doing some crazy animations, yeah, that might not be available. You just have to use a combination. I guess not everything could be done in Tailwind. That's fine. Same thing with this. They're saying using like these other space things and then figuring out, well, what's the specificity and what happens? Why is this failing? Yeah, I've encountered this. Yes, that's tricky. Yes, that's one of the things that sucks about it. Sometimes you're going to have that, but you're just going to have to realize, well, should I even use this or should I just do something else, right? What's faster, and maybe this is one of those one-offs that you're just going to have to deal with. This one, CSS is better for spacing, and you could just do that. Well, you could also just write flex and then give it your gap, and then you're done too. So I don't know what's faster. Who knows? It could be either way on that one. This, I agree. This is weird. Why would we be doing this? So just because you could do something doesn't mean it's a good thing, right? This might not be a good thing. Hey, but it's cool you could do it. But why be making things more complicated than it needs to be? So yeah, sure, that's there. It's available. This one I thought was really interesting. I haven't come across this yet as I'm still new to using Tailwind, but from what I'm seeing here, yeah, if you had to do this, my first thought would be, well, that's just how it is. The second thought is, well, that does suck. So how could you make it better? Well, why don't you just do what he's doing here? Why don't you just take this little snippet? If it's this complicated and it's this hard to understand and you really need this thing, then just copy this thing and put it into wherever your CSS is and be on your way. You can still use Tailwind and you can still use regular CSS. Why not have both, right? I just feel like that's what everyone's misunderstanding is you can combine things. It doesn't have to be 100% Tailwind into everything that you do. Sure, that would be ideal, but there are going to be things that when you come across, you can't find. And that was one of the things that I hated the most when I was digging into it is, well, why can't I do it this way? Or why can't I do something like that? Actually, let's talk about one of them. One of them that I was like struggling to try to figure out was like, how would I write? I actually have like calc. So is there like a calc property, right? How would I do that? And I was like struggling to figure that out until I learned about, this like little variant. Okay, so you could do your calc in here and then like write your logic or whatever, right? To make that. But it looks weird. How would you ever know that? How would I have ever known or figured this out, right? It took time to figure that out. What is this like underscore? Like figuring out the syntax sure is a little different. And that's one thing I didn't like. So like as far as abstraction goes, yeah, there's going to be a few of those that get you. But overall, as you start to like understand it more, another thing, here, let's read this one here. Let's go into here. I can't remember quite what all I was going to talk about on some of these. Okay, sure. So like this is like the normal way that you'd write the CSS for this. And then this would be one of their examples that they're showing with this card of here's how we might have done this back in the day, right? Okay, you've got all these class names that no one knows what they are. So same thing like with Tailwind. Well, what if I don't know Tailwind? How do I know what all these are? You're going to have to go look them up regardless. So would you rather jump into a project where you have no idea what this is in here and have to go look and search for that class? And hero is so generic. How do you know you're not going to have some other clashing class with that overrides other specificity or something else, right? Or would you rather learn and understand these, even though this sucks? I get it. I've been there. I've written CSS forever. I hate having to look things up. Why would I want to go learn this thing? If you're managing multiple projects and it's all right here, and you don't have to, as you do it over and over again, now it all becomes clear and it all makes sense. This is going to be so much easier to maintain multiple different projects. Whereas if you're bouncing between several different, this hero class is not going to be the same as this class would be the same, right? Or something like that, this instance. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I think it really depends on your project. If you're rolling something custom and you're good with all the styles and what they need, sure, this is great. There's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with this either. But it would be much easier to manage multiple projects and jump between them. That context switching, that's really big, right? So here's the other thing, like, okay, write all this stuff. Is that easier to understand? Maybe. And then this one, the container card, here's I was like all these styles that we're looking at above. That's great too. Yeah, sure, you could do this. apply, let me see. Yeah, they're talking about never use apply. We kind of already covered that. So yeah, that was an interesting article. One of the things that I came across too is I really like this. It looks awful and it works. And that's pretty much, there's a lot of truth to that. Just seeing kind of how fast you can iterate on something without having to jump between files. Sure, if you can get over the class soup thing, I think it's pros that I was telling you about. So if we inspect this, again, I'm still working on this. So just pop off this background color. So with one class name right here, it's just called pros. So if I cut that out, here's just the styles, right? Nothing special, just regular styles. But we put this pros back on. Look how much it just fixes everything to look nice and readable and legible without having to do any logic. Why is this so great? I've worked on WordPress for years, and I can't tell you the amount of times that I would have to style all custom WYSIWYG editor junk. And the fact that I can add one class name that could just handle it wherever that logic's coming from. Maybe it's coming from Contentful or one of these other headless CMSs, right? All of that custom styling that you have to use for every little time that it's somewhere else or coming up with your own class name. In fact, I'll show you what I had to use. It was like all this like BEM style stuff. So like this was the style guide, and here was the heading, and here was the color, and then like if it was in this WYSIWYG content thing and it was a P tag and it was a U tag, UL, like all the time and effort I've spent styling all this stuff. It's like, it's just nonsense. And now all that goes away with one thing that's readable, legible, accessible. So yeah, this is what it's called here, Tailwind CSS typography. I know a few other videos I've seen online and we're talking about it. That's how I found out about it. And yeah, so you're talking about speed. Yeah, there's where some of the speed comes in. Here's a cheat sheet. That was another thing that I was turned on to. Some other guy was talking about, I think it was Theo, maybe. I watched one of his videos and he mentioned this. And yeah, one thing I was always in the Tailwind docs trying to look up and figure out what all these classes are. A cheat sheet to just get you by as you're learning. It's going to take time, obviously, to kind of learn all these dumb names and how it all works, especially if you've been writing CSS for 10 plus years. But the speed that I've found myself, already kind of getting the hang of it. So I've been writing Tailwind now for about 2 years, maybe 3 years, just on and off through different projects. And I can tell you, jumping back into a non-Tailwind project, I've since changed my mind quite a bit, which is a big thing coming from me, because you have to realize for me, it's like I'm all about the custom styles, writing everything correctly, doing linting. Oh my goodness, let me tell you about linting. What kind of linting do you have to worry about with your Sass or custom CSS? So much setup, so many packages, so many different things, right? So many different rules. How are you where does your media query go? Where does all this other stuff go? What order do you want to order your properties? Do you want to have, there's just so much. All of that stuff just melts away. You don't need any of that. All that goes away when using this utility-based CSS library or framework, whatever we're calling this thing. Yeah, you don't have to worry about that, right? How many times have I had to spend hours setting up styled components to work within a library storybook system to make sure that it compiled correctly, and that, think of all the JavaScript that has to get bundled up with your main package of all the styled components that you wrote, right? All of that stuff just melts away. You're writing so many less styles, all to add and learn a few little class names, right? So that's the stuff that I don't hear very many people talking about either. So between these things here, and then there's a whole nother, there's another Tailwind library for just, gathering already pre-built components. Another thing, like there's like headless UI. That's one. I had used this like a long time ago when I hated Tailwind, just because I didn't like the thought of trying to learn all these dumb classes. Well, now using Tailwind, now these things can just be ready to go out of the box without me having to restyle the component myself. So that's another huge pro of like speeding up your time. Do you want to build all these things to be accessible and work correctly, or do you want to pick one up that's already ready to go and usable and maybe change a few different appearances? Again, it just depends on like your project and what you're using, but the speed of doing this is incredible. And if you're a freelancer or somebody who's, needs to support their family and get projects done quickly, how many more hours do you want to waste doing the tedious thing when it's just you're trying to churn and burn out projects, right? I've built hundreds of websites and I've spent so much time carefully writing all these styles that now no one will ever see or care about, or some junior devs come in and ruin them all in the first place, right? Whereas this is a lot harder to mess up all these different class names and different stuff that you have to come up with and figure out the name and is it this and all these methodologies, right? So that's one thing that it's just hard to ignore. And as much as I've hated it, I've really started to understand the power, the speed, the consistency between my styles. Yeah. Oh, hey, I got a somebody. Hey, I'm doing good. How are you? But yeah, so just trying to record this video and kind of explain some of these things with Tailwind that I'm starting to see. And yeah, I know it's been a little bit since I've posted some videos, so trying to get back into it. Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. So hopefully I'll have some good content. I've learned a lot since doing a lot of the WordPress stuff and been jumping more into React and React-based projects, and I've been loving that a lot more. So yeah, pretty pumped. Have a lot of other cool things, but really I want to know from everyone else, like these are great articles, completely agree, but drop some notes down in the comments what you think. What's your experience with Tailwind? Do you love it, hate it? I can see both sides here, but really, really annoying. Just the speed of it. And I know it's really hard to get over the ugliness, but it just makes a big difference. And really it's just nice to not have to jump between more files. I can already kind of see exactly what's happening here. One thing I did want to talk about real quick, I had an example of stuff you don't want to do. So I'm not going to say where I got this from, but I've been in projects where for some reason, we use this class name thing and then they drop every style on its own line. Why is this bad? 14-year-olds learning. Hey, awesome. I'm glad you're learning. Man, that's off. I wish I was learning when I was 14 years old, because I remember writing HTML in like high school and they just had us they gave us a hard-coded paper, just a paper, and we had to like type it out and copy it ourselves. And that was our learning. And I'm like, this is horrible. But yeah, so yeah, with this class name stuff, why is this bad? Why? Well, first of all, it just makes your lines massive, right? This is bad. Content, like just the whole length of the file. Why would we want that? It just makes your component longer, harder to read, kind of like what's happening between here and here, and where am I, and what is this element. So one thing, I always do is like break these up onto new lines, and then like select all these and then put space here, so like try to, if you're going to have tons of styles like that, it's better to try to keep them as much as possible on one line. Why though? There is a prettier linting plugin for Tailwind to where if I save this, actually here, I'll go over to this file. So like if I move the order of this out of here, let me just remove this thing that we were learning on. So if I move this padding clear over here, right? And then I save this, it automatically moved the padding back over here. And that is really, really nice for when you're doing pull requests, PR reviews, and you just know that the order should be in the order that it is. Why else is that great? Well, what if I have, this one happens to be a block element. I know it's a div, but we're just going to add block. And then I'm writing a bunch of other inline styles here. And then I happen to write block again. It's going to tell me right away that hey, we already have the class on here, it's duplicated. What if I were to write flex? Well, now it's going to tell me, hey, that's kind of in the same display selector, right? Like it will identify that there's an issue or like a duplicate class. How many times can you say that that might have happened in regular CSS without any kind of linting, right? Where you're just accidentally had added other styles that were maybe overriding or having that specificity, right? So if you have these all in one line and I write flex down here, oh, I needed a comma here. There's no way that this is going to be able to know that this was on here twice. And I've seen that so many times when the devs are writing the logic for their component that they're building, that they've had duplicate styles and one was overriding the other and they couldn't figure out why. It's because there's no linting safety with this thing either. So that's a bigger reason. And like I understand, like, hey, this is all set up to go. So now when you're writing like your A/B tests, now you can just write your logic for when these classes should apply. But you can even see here, right? There's like some mistakes with this code. Like, why does this need to be twice? We could just pop this into here and then it's the same thing. Just do that all in one thing. When this should be there, and then apply all these classes, right? So everything should be ideally all chopped up. And if your prettier or whatever says, hey, it can't be so many lines long, right? Like that is one thing I'm still unsure on how to like what's the best route to go about that, right? Like it will wrap down, but it might grow so long. I don't know. I'm still learning, still trying to figure that out myself. I did see one video though where I need to look into this, but this whole thing might go away. Hear me out. What if it was a possibility to take this class name prop and collapse it to where all this showed would be something like ... and then you click the ... and then it expands it. Would that solve the class soup? I saw a video where I thought I saw that this was a possibility. I need to look into that. But now we've just solved the ugliness. Now we know, okay, that's a div there, that's something there, here's something there. And now all that headache that I've been worried about for so long goes away. You'd be able to click the dots or whatever. I'm sure there's something in VS Code that would do that. Currently struggling to find a good tutorial for a register layout for a website. Okay, let me see. I don't know, register layout. I'd have to know maybe a little bit more what you're looking for. But yeah, I don't know. Layouts, like one thing. Layouts. There is like a good, what is that site where you find layouts? I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know there's like a site that you can like preview themes and kind of see like some designs. What is that called? Shoot, I should know this. Oh, I think it's called Dribble. Is that right? Is that right? Dribble. Designer search. Inspiration. So yeah, like this. So you could like, type in register or something. So this could give you like an idea to like look for just designs for people to like sign up for something. I don't know, that would be one, right? Like, okay, so here's one. Like you want them to like just to get ideas for like forms or something, and you could build it out. But yeah, I don't know. That's a good question though. So yeah, that's pretty much what I've got on Tailwind. I'm sure I could talk more and more about it, but those are some of the things like that I've seen and felt, and still learning, still understanding myself. But that's kind of where I'm at so far. Really enjoying it. But yeah, that's all I got for you. Okay, hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know if this was helpful at all. Let me know if I rambled too much, because I've been out of the practice of doing videos and recording. So yeah, all right, later.